UN News.
Last week, while everyone was distracted by everything, it was the anniversary of the nuclear bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So I know there's a lot of stuff that schools aren't going to be teaching you about this. So we're going to be your little teachers today. Come along, class. Today is the history lesson. Okay. We have the substitute teacher, Alan Macleod, from MintPress in with us this evening, right? And he's going to talk to you about the 80 years of lies you were probably taught and how the U.S. finally admits it knew it didn't need to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, the only people to have ever used nuclear bombs on innocent people, us, the U.S., you know? So you wonder how that happened, Care Bear? Well, as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings, the world is drifting as close to another nuclear confrontation as it has been in decades. With Israeli and American attacks on Iranian nuclear energy sites, India and Pakistan going to war in May, and escalating violence between Russia and Ukraine, the shadow of another nuclear war looms large over daily life. The United States remains the only nation to have dropped an atomic bomb in anger, while the dates of August 6th and August 9th, 1945, are seared into the popular conscience of all Japanese people. Those days hold far less salience in American society. When discussed at all in the U.S., the dark chapter in human history is usually presented as a necessary evil or even a day of liberation, an event that saved hundreds of thousands of lives, prevented the need for an invasion of Japan, and ended the Second World War early. This, however, could not be further from the truth. If they would lie to us, Collin, when would they do that? American generals and the war planners agreed that Japan was on the point of collapse and had for weeks been attempting to negotiate a surrender. Sound familiar? The decision then to incinerate hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians was one taken to project American power across the world and to stymie the rise of the Soviet Union. It always appeared to us that atomic bomb or no atomic bomb, the Japanese were already on the verge of collapse. General Henry Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Armed Air Forces in 1945, wrote in his 1949 memoirs. How long is that? We went from when was it dropped? 1945?
Yeah.
3 years later, like 4 years later, here's the general of the Army Air Forces, English. He's like, "Oh yeah, no, we knew."
Yeah, that's a confession. Like,
yeah,
that's a confession.
And it's not like
we
this is like some
do it, but we did it anyway because we
modern
can.
guy. In hindsight, no, this was like this was in the present, right? I granted past, but at that point it was the present. You know, that shit had just happened. Like, they were still over there in 1949, I guarantee you. Right? Like, who was that? MacArthur was over there still. So Arnold was far from alone in this assessment. Indeed, Fleet Admiral William Leahy, the Navy's highest-ranking officer during World War II, bitterly condemned the United States for its decision and compared his own country to the most savage regimes in world history. As he wrote in 1950, again, 5 years after this, right? It is my opinion that the use of this barbarous weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. The Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender. My own feeling was that in being the first to use it, we had adopted an ethical standard common of the barbarians of the Dark Ages. By 1945, Japan has been militarily and economically exhausted, losing key allies Italy and Germany by May 1945, and facing the immediate prospect of an all-out Soviet invasion of Japan. The country's leaders were frantically pursuing peace negotiations. Their only real condition appeared to be that they wished to keep as a figurehead the emperor, a position that some accounts date back more than 2,600 years. That's all they wanted. Let us have an emperor. That was it. Not even as a figurehead, not even as like UK's got their queen, same thing. That's all they wanted.
Same thing, yeah.
I am convinced former President Herbert Hoover wrote to his successor, Harry S. Truman, if you, as president, will make a shortwave broadcast to the people of Japan, tell them that they can have their emperor if they surrender, that it will not mean unconditional surrender except for its militarists. You'll get a peace in Japan. You'll have both wars over. Would have been D-Day earlier. Like, not D-Day, V-Day. You know what I mean.
Yes.
Many of Truman's closest advisors told him the same thing. I am absolutely convinced that had we said they could keep the emperor together with the threat of an atomic bomb, they would have accepted, and we would never have to have dropped it. And John Macleod, Truman's Assistant Secretary of War. Nevertheless, Truman initially took an absolutist position, refusing to hear any Japanese negotiating caveats. This stance, according to General Douglas MacArthur, commander of Allied forces in the Pacific, actually lengthened the war. The war might have ended weeks earlier, he said, if the United States had agreed, as it later did anyway, to the retention of the institution of the emperor. Truman, however, dropped 2 bombs, then reversed his position on the emperor in order to stop Japanese society from falling apart. At that point in the war, however, the United States was emerging as the sole global superpower and enjoyed an unprecedented position of influence. The dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan underscored this. It was a power play intended to strike fear into the hearts of world leaders, especially in the Soviet Union and China. Hiroshima and Nagasaki drastically curbed the USSR's ambitions in Japan. Stalin's forces had invaded and permanently annexed Sakhalin Island in 1945 and planned to occupy Hokkaido, Japan's second largest island. The more likely prevented the island nation from coming under the Soviet sphere of influence. To this day, Japan remains deeply tied to the U.S. economically, politically, and militarily. There are around 60,000 U.S. troops in Japan, spread across 120 military bases. Many in Truman's admin wished to use the atom bomb against the Soviet Union as well. Truman, however, worried that the destruction of Moscow would lead the Red Army to invade and destroy Western Europe as a response. As such, he decided to wait until the U.S. had enough warheads to completely destroy the USSR and its military in one fell swoop. That's called supremacy, right? That is what our military is still based on. So, war planners estimated this figure to be around 400. To that end, Truman ordered the immediate ramping up of production. Such a strike, we now know, would have caused a nuclear winter that would have permanently ended all organized life on Earth. Thoughts so far?
Yeah, McLeod basically said it. You know, it was a power play for us, the U.S., to essentially blow up Japan. Because ever since, but thinking about this now, you know, like even within the culture of Japan now, like again, we're both. I think you're more of an anime fan than me, I would argue. But
I don't know. You be going a little deeper sometimes. Just depends on the anime. You know,
I think it just definitely depends. But even with the idea of, you know, a lot of anime, or even just within the language itself, there's some mostly English influence. Like, granted, you can also argue like Western language, Western world. You know, like they bring a lot of loan words into, the Japanese language, but mostly English.
Yeah.
So, right. So, but yeah, but it's kind of, so you can kind of see that it's more in terms the effect that the US had, even now, kind of in a subtle way, of Japan's culture in that regard. It's kind of, it wouldn't necessarily be obvious unless you know about this, but I don't think people necessarily make that connection that it was due to this that has led Japan to be, I wouldn't say sympathetic, but a little bit more uh, culturally resonant to what's happening in the West, and then having their, like art and like a lot of their, their language respond accordingly. Like,
Yeah.
there should be really no reason, honestly, for an Asian country, and I don't necessarily see this in any Asian country, like where there's a lot of Western influence.
There's a
Like,
couple.
again, going to anime, they're talking about shit, or some aesthetics are very like, even like the anime characters, yes, they might be Japanese, but they have many of them have a very European feel to them.
For sure.
So, so even with stuff like
Well,
that,
it's Japanese
it's just
beauty aesthetics and all that stuff too. On top of that, got shifted and
right. But that's all Western aesthetics. Like,
plus, I mean, if you watch any of the Miyazakis and any of the, Godzilla, the influence that bombing had on those people was massive. Like, so, but I thought you might find this part interesting, Care Bear. So this is from Joe Lauria, who writes Atomic Bombings at 80, How U.S. Spies Secured the Hiroshima Uranium. Have you heard about this? Have you heard about how this happened?
No.
Right? Well, we need the uranium, right? So we're going to have to go to a place to get it. Since the first use of a nuclear weapon in Hiroshima 80 years ago, on August 6, 1945, the story of where the uranium for the bomb came from and the covert operations the U.S. employed to secure it was little known. That was until the 2016 publication of the book Spies in the Congo by British researcher Susan Williams, right, which unveiled for the first time the detailed story of the deep cover race between the Americans and the Nazis to get their hands on the deadliest metal on Earth. The outset of World War II, when the U.S. launched the extraordinarily secret Manhattan Project, mines in North America and most of the rest of the world yielded ore with less than 1% uranium, considered inadequate to build the first atom bombs. There was a mine in the world where, through freak of nature, the ore yielded up to 65% uranium. Right? Shinkolobwe? I think that's how you say that, right?
Sure.
Shinkolobwe? Whatever. My Western tongue's difficult. Mine in the present day Republic of Congo. Right? So, another ignored link is the disastrous health effect on Congolese miners who handled the uranium as virtual slaves of the Belgian mining giant Union Miniere, owners of Shinkolobwe, and then in the then Belgian Congo, though it turned out the Nazis had not got very far in their quest for the bomb. Again, because of the lack of their highly enriched uranium, the Americans were unaware of that in 1939 and were fearful Hitler would get a nuclear weapon before they did. They'd have almost certainly affected the outcome of the war. As early as that year, Albert Einstein, wrote President Franklin Roosevelt to indirectly advise him to keep the Nazis away from the Shinkolobwe and secure the uranium there for the United States.
I mean,
y'all learn that shit in
our
class?
hands is just as bad. So, like, pick your poison. I get why, but like, but at the same time, it's like we wouldn't have done much better, and we didn't.
What faith did Einstein practice again?
I guess he must have thought the U.S. government a lot more highly than I think now in retrospect.
Yeah.
He probably should have. So,
So anyway,
So 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 in a way, do we have to blame Einstein for the bomb?
well, see, here's the thing that history's tried to kind of whitewash him in a way as like being anti nukes.
Or yeah.
Well, anti-nuclear war, and like in reality, he was here advising the president to make sure the Nazis don't have it. We got to have it. So let's exploit the Africans to do so. Right?
Right.
So, so Williams' meticulously researched and masterfully written book tells the intricate tale of a special unit of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. What did that become, Collin? What did the OSS end up turning into?
FBI?
The CIA, but you're close.
Okay.
That was set up to purchase and secretly remove all the uranium from Shikolobwe that the U.S. could get its hands on. Right? So not just like, hey, we need some for us for this like thing.
All of it.
We need all that shit. Give us all of it. So the OSS agents used a number of covers. Get this. They appeared as ornithologists, naturalists collecting live gorillas, silk importers, and posing as an executive for the Texaco Oil Company, such as Agent Linear Violet did. This became an issue after Texaco's president, Torkild Rabier, was forced to resign in 1940 after being exposed as an oil smuggler to the Nazis and hiring Germans who turned out to be spies using Texaco's internal communications to transmit intelligence information to Berlin. So, how many of those Texaco's employees still around in the administrations, huh? How many of those?
Yeah.
You know, Williams also tells us that the American spies had difficulties operating in French Congo and other colonies under General Charles de Gaulle's Free French control because the U.S. recognized the Vichy government until the Normandy invasion. Okay? So, yeah. The decision to destroy Russia was met with stiff opposition among the American scientific community. It is now widely believed that Manhattan Project scientists, including Oppenheimer himself, passed nuclear secrets to Moscow in an effort to speed up their nuclear project and develop a deterrent to halt the doomsday scenario. This part of history, however, was left out of the 2023 biopic movie. I wonder why. By 1949, the USSR was able to produce a credible nuclear deterrent before the US had produced sufficient quantities for an all-out attack, thus ending the threat and bringing the world into the era of mutually assured destruction. That was 1949. It was 4 years after we bombed, right? So definitely got some help. Certainly prior to the 31st of December, and in all probability, prior to November, Japan would have surrendered even if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, even if Russia had not entered the war, and even if no invasion had been planned or contemplated, including a 1946 report from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. That was in 1946, a year after, right? So Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and future president, was of the same opinion, stating that Japan was already defeated, dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. It was no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. It was my belief that Japan was, at this very moment, seeking a way to surrender with a minimum loss of face. Nevertheless, both Truman and Eisenhower publicly toyed with the idea of using nukes against China to stop the rise of communism and to defend their client regime in Taiwan. China. Yeah, we're going to be doing that again soon. So it is only the development of a Chinese warhead in 1964 that led to the end of the danger, and ultimately the détente era of good relations between the two powers that lasted until President Obama's pivot to Asia. Ultimately, then, the people of Japan were the collateral damage in a giant U.S. attempt to project its power worldwide. As Brigadier General Kerr Clark, head of U.S. intelligence on Japan, wrote, "When we didn't need to do it, and we knew we didn't need to do it, and then they knew that we knew we didn't need to do it, we used them, Japanese citizens, as an experiment for 2 atomic bombs." The danger of nuclear weapons is far from over. Today, Israel and the United States, 2 nations with atomic weaponry, attack Iranian nuclear facilities, yet their continued hyper-aggressive actions against their foes only suggest to other countries that unless they too possess weapons of mass destruction, they will not be safe. North Korea, a country with a conventional and nuclear deterrent, faces no such airstrikes from the US or its allies. These actions, therefore, will likely result in more nations pursuing nuclear ambitions. Earlier this year, India and Pakistan, 2 more nuclear-armed states, came into open conflict thanks to disputes over terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Many influential individuals on both sides of the border were demanding their respective side launch their nukes, a decision that could also spell the end of organized human life. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed. So I wanted to touch back, they spoke about this like blackmail thing, right? That, we use this as a power play, right? So
right.
You heard them talk about the Israeli-Iran thing, right? We remember that. We covered that, I do believe. So
Yep.
This is from Mondo Weiss, how U.S. imperialism blackmails the world with nuclear weapons. And since the U.S. dropped a bomb, imperialism has driven nuclear proliferation worldwide. Current nuclear flashpoints, such as Iran, show the U.S. continues to use blackmail to reinforce its dominance, right? So, again, current nuclear weapon flashpoints reflect broader U.S. military strategy and its fight to be the sole hegemonic imperialist power. The 3 fronts: Eastern Europe against Russia, the U.S.-Israel Gulf-Turkish alliance against Iran, and an iron web of alliances in the Pacific, including the Australia, UK, US, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Philippines, and Japan, Australia, India, US Quad against China and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, are all marked by the threat of nuclear weapons. The US uses nuclear blackmail against its rivals in the region, painting them as authoritarian dictatorships or terrorists, while it blatantly drags the people who would be affected by a nuclear catastrophe into wars they never asked for. The U.S. aggression will only breed more anti-imperialist sentiment by the people in the region, uniting against U.S. nuclear threats, if that's possible. The U.S. brought nuclear weapons into the world, then made the decision to arm its allies and attempt to use them to impose its will wherever it pleased. Think of where Israel got theirs. The history of nuclear weapons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki to the current 3 fronts of U.S.-led war exposes the fundamental contradiction of nuclear warfare. While imperialist powers use atomic weapons to threaten and dominate, anti-imperialist states have developed them to prevent further war on the people. Thousands have engaged in advocacy efforts to reduce the U.S. nuclear triad to demand cleanup and compensate for damages, and to block the U.S. $1.7 trillion nuclear modernization program. Even though the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nukes have accumulated 94 signatory states, including Iran, right, since it's entered into force in 2021, making nuclear weapons illegally internationally. The U.S. had no vision in sight towards dismantling its arsenal or joining the treaty. The U.S.-led war machine has been at the head of the imperialist system for decades, therefore being the main perpetrator and provocateur of nuclear proliferation. We must understand the U.S. refuses to give up its arsenal, and instead it's plowing headfirst into a potential nuclear catastrophe as a result of its imperialist agenda.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Since World War II, U.S. imperialism has leveraged its military sector to simulate economic growth, a strategy that has consistently led to economic resource dislocation and periodic systemic crisis. The U.S. military-industrial complex thus serves to extend and sustain the capitalist business cycle, particularly during periods of monopoly capitalist crisis. Sound familiar? Like now?
Yep.
Consequently,
Yep.
global conflicts often stem directly from the immense profitability of U.S. weapons production. The current expansion of the war machine on multiple fronts exemplifies the accumulation of waste, plundering of land, resources, and nature, alongside devastation and weakening of human lives. This global war economy allows U.S. imperialism to dispossess, and displace populations, swelling the global reserve army of labor, suppressing wages, and physically debilitating working people. The US-led war machine has been at the head of the imperialist system for decades. Therefore, being the main perpetrator, the solution is not to impose disarmament or opposed nations, but the complete dismantling of the imperialist war machine and its nuclear terror apparatus, which must start with the U.S. The U.S. will never voluntarily give up its biggest guns. True peace can only come through the total defeat of the U.S. imperialism and its junior partners, a victory that will require global solidarity and relentless struggle for just peace. Any questions? We picking up what we're putting
US
down?
sucks.
Yep. Yes, sir.
But it's interesting how I think given this, yes, Japan obviously is, victims given that, but also the Congolese as well.
Yeah.
Which wasn't really mentioned at all. That's kind of the thing that I noticed, especially with what I think Joe wrote.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously, and I think, but again, everything kind of comes back to Africa in terms of the resources. I think you told me I was interested. Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's still the idea of and this is what gets me mad about people saying that Africa ain't worth shit. Well, if Africa ain't worth shit,
why is it
that the West still wants to?
Right.
Why is it that the West still wants to claim Africa as their own?
Capitalism.
Because there's still shit that is worth having. Like the very fact that we have smartphones now, the materials were originally gotten from Africa.
Yep.
It's just maybe that they were probably assembled in other countries. But but that's the thing that I think we should be aware of. And I think honestly, this is just a reminder for us, how significant Africa is and how we need to really, in a lot of ways, protect it. Because if the materials that we're able to accumulate from Africa, if those happen to be gone,
the vibranium, right,
what will happen to the rest of the world?
Yeah.
And the implications of that. So I don't think we think about that enough, if at all. And but given how the uranium that we use to bomb the Japanese was
African
exploited from
yeah,
talk about hidden history. Sure, most of our audience, anyone who's watching, did not know that. I did not know that too.
Neither did I was like, oh shit. Better bring this.
I think again, this is why I think we need to do a better job of teaching world history in general. But then again, even in world history, they're not going to this shit.
No.
But not in this extent. But
my history teachers it taught me something I found very important then. I still do. They were like, my main job is to teach you how to learn history. Because I physically cannot teach you all of it.
Right.
You're going to have to be the one to be able to figure that out.
Right.
But
it also makes me
Our
think.
enemies are all those in league with imperialism. The bureaucrats.
I was
the
very
big landlord
fortunate.
class and the
Now,
reactionary section of the intelligentsia attached to them.
I was very fortunate that I went to a private school where I had world history like my friend. But it makes me wonder why world history is not necessarily taught more like,
Yep.
like in comparison, like when you're in high school, the emphasis is US history. You have 2 years at that, I believe at least 2. Why is that more of a precedent over like world history to see how things are more connected globally versus just the concentration of like what's happening in this country. I understand it, but we have to also understand how interconnected the decisions that we make in the US kind of stem from other countries as well, and how that kind of ties in to like even currently, given what's happening in Israel, is affecting us here, we've seen it affecting us in Africa, has been an effect, obviously in the Middle East, and how, Netanyahu wants to expand the Greater Israel Project. Like, we need
Uh-huh.
to understand all of those connections.
Well, especially if you're
And
gonna you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
right. So it just makes me wonder if I'm sure a lot of it is intentional, but but how effective, and you're right. That being said, you're right. There's so much of history that we don't know,
Yeah.
and that we're not necessarily taught how to do history well. It's more or less learn these facts, repeat them, and call it a day. It's not the idea of how did this happen? Why did this come to be? How does this connect to
Yeah.
other places? Like, those are the things that we're not necessarily
the concepts and the
trained
big
to
pictures
do.
and all that. You
Right.
know?
So, and I think if we did a better job in teaching our students that, we'll be a lot better off. But obviously, I think that that's by design,
Yeah.
because the people do not want to know, or like they, just all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Which is why I think, especially in independent media, especially in the way that we kind of do things here on this show, I think have real value,
Yeah.
because at least for like generally, like within the algorithm, these are not going to do well. But we call these evergreen segments for a reason, because they stand the test of time. And like, we want to be able to have something that people can refer back to.
Yeah.
Even if like they might forget about us, but not necessarily within the content. Like, that's gonna hold forever. Well, at least as long as YouTube exists. So, but
Yep.
but no, it's interesting. But
Which I linked, by the way, I linked those articles down in the description below. I only took like snippets of them. They are actually larger reads with more information. So if you're interested in finding out that, the blackmail one especially is good. And, you might want to go.
Try and have Susan. I think it's Susan Williams.
Yeah.
But we should try and get, because again, like, that is.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Like,
so
never heard of that before. But it could be worth talking to her and figure out, like, how did she come to that?
Right.
It's like,
yeah.
Like,
so,
because
meanwhile, back in the present, over in Ukraine, where NATO forces are urging President Zelensky to up the ante, earlier this month, Trump himself reportedly encouraged the Ukrainian leader to use his Western-made weapons to strike Moscow. And remember, recently, he was like, well, if Putin doesn't come to an agreement, scary things are going to happen. It's like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it is precisely actions such as this that has led the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists to move their famous doomsday clock to 89 seconds to midnight. I'm surprised it's that far out, the closest the world has ever been to catastrophe. So the war in Ukraine, now in its third year, looms over the world. The conflict could become nuclear at any moment because of a rash decision or thorough accident or miscalculation. They wrote in their explanation, adding that conflicts in Asia could spiral out of control into a wider war at any point, and that nuclear powers are updating and expanding their arsenals. The Pentagon, too, is recruiting Elon Musk to help it build what it calls an American Iron Dome. While this move is couched in defensive language, such a system, if successful, would grant the U.S. ability to launch nukes attacks anywhere in the world without having to worry about the consequences of a similar response. Right? Literally the plot to Dr. Strangelove. Right?
Right.
AI nuclear defense, right, means that they full send. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. Thus, as we look back at the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago, we must understand that not only were they entirely avoidable, but that we are now closer to a catastrophic nuclear confrontation than many people realize. And especially when you don't even need nukes to do the level of destruction that Hiroshima and Nagasaki saw, which Palestine has now saw like 20-fold. So, you know, tough stuff. But anyway, any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
Nah, I think I said them already.
Yeah. Well, talking about this kind of history is probably why we're demonetized. So you can scan that QR code on your screen or go to this URL right here. Links are always in the description below. If you want to give us a few dollary dues, we appreciate it. But if not, just do all the algorithm stuff you already know to do. Like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. What's your take on this, you know, commemoration? Otherwise, thanks for watching.